In this video, we're going to break down the simple method of how to calculate a side-setting triangle. Let's get to it. How in the world have you been? Who's cutting squares? Who's busy doing all of this? But I want you to know that what we're going to do is continuing to build on working with either 4 patches or plain squares as we covered in the last video, because this could be a pieced triangle block that we're working with. Just for the simplicity of math, I'm going to work with a plain square. So try to keep it in your mind that it does not matter what size that square is. So I'm going to assume, let's say it's a 6, let's say it's a 5. It does not matter. The only thing that matters is when you have chosen that size square, that's the math I need to calculate this side set triangle. Now, for those of you that are more advanced in your techniques and understanding of patchwork, you know that this is a quarter square triangle. And it is a quarter square triangle because the straight of grain lives on this long leg. That tells me that that's a quarter square triangle because 4 of those came out of a square. You really want to make sure that you keep your straight of grain in the right place, and that says that anytime you want to turn a block, a 4 patch, a plain square, or a pieced element on point, you have to do your math on this little fellow right here. So the math is really the diagonal of whatever size your block is. This could be a pieced block with 600 pieces, well, that'd be a whole lot, but it also could be a simple 4 patch. So I need to choose a size. And now let's break that down. Your first job is to know what size block you are going to turn on point. So here's my block, and now I've turned it on point. Your math you're looking for is the diagonal of whatever that element is. And in this case, we are looking at a square. Now, this is a 5-inch square. I want to know what size it is from there to there. Now, this is finished size. So if your block is laying on the table at 5.5, that's not finished. Do your math based on 5 or whatever that number is. So I already know that the diagonal of 5 is 7. And ask me how I know, because I've done a jillion of them. But let's say you go, oh dear, I don't have a clue. How would I know what diagonal? Now, if you are not good friends with Mr. Pythagoras and you aren't a math degreed PhD engineer or something like that, you're probably just like me, like, Kaye, can you make this simple? Yes, I can. And now you can do this complicated, folks, and I'm not going to argue with you if you decide to do that. For me, the simplest method of getting this done, not the only method, the simplest method for me is this. Now, I have talked about the importance of having a square ruler and a rectangle ruler that read the same. In other words, they're the same brand, because that way, I mean, it's not like you can't do it with 2 different brands, but when you become familiar with reading one, it's just a little bit simpler. On the square ruler, I have a diagonal line, so if I have a 3-inch square, all I have to do is walk across to where that diagonal line goes and measure that. You do not have to know math. You do not have to own a calculator. You just need to own 2 rulers. So once I've determined what the diagonal is of what I'm after, first decision, what size is it? Go to a square ruler that's that size and go as large as you need to do that diagonal measurement. I come back to this and go, okay, I know that my 5-inch is 7. Now, I already know that because I cut a lot of 5-inch, and plus I checked with my ruler. A 12-inch block, I turn 12-inch blocks on point quite often. The diagonal of 12 is 17. So if I turned a 12-inch block on point, went from there to there, it is 17. Once I know that, pure math says add 1 1/4, cut a square that much larger, and cross-cut it twice, and it will yield you all 4. That's pure. That means perfect. That means 0 room for error. Any of you who know me know that I am not a big fan of fixing and cleaning up and sewing a block too big and cutting it back down. I just feel like it's double work. But when it comes to setting a quilt on point, I always overcut my side sets. Always. I have the ability and the knowledge to do it spot on. I just feel like a little bit of room, once you turn blocks on point, they start getting wonky. If y'all are following my wonky talk, you know I do wonky a lot. I have found that that gives me the ability to have extra float out there. And then when it comes back to cleaning time, I am not going to lose those points. This is arbitrary. It is up to you. If you decide that you're going to do yours 1 1/4, that's the math. And you can also go to your calculator and do it, and then it's a number that doesn't even live on your ruler. So to simplify your life, that's all I do is I go, okay, I know what the diagonal of this is. I find that number, and I add 2 inches, and I cut myself a square, and I cross-cut him twice. That's for these side-setting triangles. They'll be a little bit big. The white will be out about this far. That tells me that when I come back to trim it up, when I'm all finished, I do clean up side set triangles. This little fellow on the corner now is a half square triangle. So he is a square that is just cut in half. You don't need the full 2 inches. I would probably go at least the pure measurement, and sometimes I go up about 1 inch. So in other words, if I took the same math that I did for the side set triangle, instead of cutting 2 inches larger, cut it 1 inch larger. And if you're anything like me, I just cut the same size square and cut it in half instead of twice because I'm already in a mode of cutting. I've already cut my strips this size. It's just easy to cross cut myself 2 more squares to get 4 corners, if I'm setting just a plain block or as many as I need. So I found that I love this corner when it's way too big, because when you go back to true this up, I tell you that loads and loads of quilts that are set on point have a droopy corner. And when that corner drops, instead of being a perfect 90 as it runs across there, it goes like this. And the best quilter in the world can't fix that, and all the border and all the pressing in the world can't fix that. So if you cut those a little bit large and then use a 90-degree angle on your square ruler to do the cleanup, it's a piece of cake at that point. Now, this little quilt is the first in our project sheets. And it's called Scrappy Squares. I would wager that I have made 25 of these. Typically, every fabric collection that I do, I will take the components from that fabric collection, which is somewhere between 18 and 22 SKUs, pieces, and I'll make this quilt because it ends up being a good showcase for the fabric, how it works together. Well, plus I get a kick out of it. I have given most of these away or sold them. I only have a few of them left. This particular one is the photograph that will be on your project sheet. This exact one, it's out of 30s. And if you, from looking at these two, you can tell this is smaller than this one. It doesn't make any difference what size you elect to make this. The key is, are you sitting on a bunch of 5-inch squares? Use them. Do you own a bunch of 7-inch squares? Use them. This is a fabulous way, and especially for those of you that are new, to practice doing a diagonal quilt and keeping it flat and keeping it square with 90-degree corners. This is a great method. This is one that I was a little more organized with my colors, and as you can see, if you want to build this where you change colors, all you do is build your outside row, then change color coming on the next row in. I can make a queen-size quilt, folks, out of this by just simply building that way. And this is where a design wall is real helpful to you, because you need to be able to get back and look at this. Now, this second little quilt that is one of your project sheets is a little quilt I call Sweet Memories. We've used this quite often. We've used it as congratulatory gifts. A group of us have made quilts for memory of a lost loved one. There's loads of, in these little rail settings here, there's loads of room. I think there's like spots for 40, 50 signatures. Let's say you've got a wedding coming up, and this would be a fun quilt to make for the couple and have all their friends sign it. And if you keep cream fabrics in your side sets, there's loads of extra room to write in there as well. And I'm pretty sure that there's going to be a few people viewing this that was the recipient of one of these quilts. And let me tell you, this is really a sweet little quilt to make, happy or whatever the occasion. When you configure a quilt like this, one thing I want you to look at is the size of this triangle is the sum of these two blocks. So this now becomes the size of my square. So in other words, instead of just one square we're looking at, I have to do a setting triangle that covers two squares. So your math has to be done on what is this one, so there's two squares worth. So if this is 3 and this is 3, then 6 is what I'm after. If that's 4 and that's 4, then 8 is the diagonal that I'm after. To do the same old math, diagonal plus 2. Now your little handout has all the math for you to do it exactly like this pattern. Now, the little quilt that we're looking at now is called Toast and Jam. And some of you might have seen this because we've done it in a couple of programs, and it's a great combination of taking your little 9 patches, which this is built on a 9 patch here, and then it just rails out. But what I want to talk about on this one is how this side setting is calculated. Now the block itself is huge, but this is one of the 900,000 million things I learned from Mary Ellen Hopkins. One of the things about having a big block that you want to set on point, you don't necessarily want to just put a big side set triangle in there. So what's really great about this little fellow is, let's say I went, wow, I love this block, but I don't want just a big triangle in there. I think I want to use components. So you can see there's a 9 patch, there's a square equal the 9 patch, and there's another square building the 9 patch. Mary Ellen typically referred to this as an incorporated border, meaning that you pieced some of the elements of your side setting triangle, you built it out to where you had another smaller side setting triangle. I could have done this whole thing as one big triangle, but by piecing your border, what you've done now is taking elements that lived within your quilt, pull them out into your border, so it looks like you've done way more work than you have. And I tell you, this is where a design board, I don't care if you have to go out in the garage and get a sheet of plywood or something, come up with something, get yourself something that you can put it up on the wall, because building this without that is very, very difficult. So this is a square, this is a square, this is a square, and this is a square, all the same size. That's the size I now do my calculating for this side set triangle. So let's say this was 3 inches. What's the diagonal of 3? Plus 2 inches is what size that fellow is. Had I just done this whole big unit right here, then I would have wanted to know what it is from that point to that point. The complexity of the block can go out into the incorporated border or not. Now, this is one of your project sheets that we've done way more detail. I think there's 3 pages to this project sheet. So it's step A, B, and C. It's not just a here's the block. This is the entire quilt layout, everything, what you cut it, and the whole 9 yards. Now, for those of you who own Accuquilt, and I've talked about this quite a bit, I love Accuquilt. I use it when I need a lot of things, and Accuquilt recently introduced side setting triangle dies. So like the first quilt I showed you, the Scrappy Squares, let's say that your block was 5 inches and you went, oh, I don't have a cube that's 5 inches. Do you have the side setting triangle that goes with the 6-inch one? I would use that. And if you use the number 1 and 2 dies in all of the cubes, the 4, the 6, the 8, the 9, the 10, and the 12, all those cubes, Die 1 is the square that is half the size of the cube. So an 8-inch cube has a die 1 would be 4 inches. It's half of it. Die 1 and a 12 would be 6, and on it goes. Die 2 is half of die 1. So if die 1 is 6, then die 2 is 3. Blah, blah, blah. If you own a 4-inch side setting triangle, a 6-inch side setting triangle, an 8-inch, a 9-inch, a 10-inch, and a 12-inch, you probably got everything you're going to need for 99.9% of what you need. You're welcome, Accuquilt. Now, the Accuquilt is designed for perfect execution. However, I'd probably err a little bit, playing like we are, with going to the next nearest size. Now, if you're working and everything is smooth, then yep, it's great to cut those, and I've used them quite a bit where they're spot on. And it even cuts your corners and your sides at the same time. So if this ended up being 3, and you went, oh, I don't have a 3. Well, do you have the 4? Then I'd use the 4. I'd be a little bit oversized, just like I am on that one. Okay, now next we're going to look at 4 of our cute little patterns called Daily Bread. They're now all PDFs, and we're going to show you 4 of them because it all relates to the elements we've been talking about. Squares, turned on point, on it goes. Now let's take a look at this little project, which is called Croutons. And this is, a lot of people looked at this and went, oh, there's no way I'm going to make that rascal. I can tell you that right now. Because the entire 4 patch is an inch. So 4 equals an inch. That's a lot of tight sewing. That's where you want your 1/4 inch to be real happy. And take a look. Once I know that that's an inch, what's the diagonal of an inch? That's how I calculate this. And let's say you like this, but you're going, oh man, Kaye, there's no way in the world I'm gonna make that little one. You can make those little squares 3 inches because you already know the math. You just choose the size of the 4 patch, measure it from corner to corner, add 2 inches, cut those little guys for the sides, add an inch, and cut the little guys for the corner, and you've made croutons in any size, and you can build forever. I like it in this little strippy setting, but certainly it could be done in different settings. Now, another one of the little project sheets in Daily Bread is called Blueberry Frost, and again, I've made this in probably 10 different fabric collections, and the reason I wanted to show you this particular one, this is really a 5 patch. And you know from our conversation that I like to sew in a 2 patch or a 3 patch mode. Well, you can't always. So I might put 4 patch, 4 patch, add 2, 4 patch, 4 patch, add 2. So the method of how you get there once you calculate the number of squares that are going to live in there, again, whatever size that is, and I decided to frame these out, then this side set triangle math is done on point to point, and that's how I calculate that. And in this particular one, I didn't do any borders. Take a peek at how this is pointed. Well, I didn't put corners on it. I only put sides on it. And if you just sew a big strip of fabric, leave it hanging off here, then when you're all done, go back and put a ruler there and cut it off. Leave it hanging off there, go back and put a ruler on it and cut it off. You can turn these pointed without doing any difficult work. You aren't cutting anything fancy, just put one side on, and then clean it up on the sides. I will have overcut my side set triangles, but quite often I like to change these points, especially if this is going to be a table runner on like your dining room table. This is really attractive to do. I still could do this and continue to border, but I like this being the same fabric as my side set triangle. Now, a third one in this series of the Little Daily Breads is Ambrosia. And Ambrosia, I thought that was a cute name. Don't ask me how, I don't know, sleep too late or something came up with this. But if you look at this, this certainly talks about my comment about Mary Ellen calling incorporated borders. Look how complex this looks. It's really a big 4 patch and then a sister unit that lives with it that's made up of a 4 patch that has 2 baby 4 patches, kind of like croutons, with a square. So there's a double 4-patch, a double 4-patch, a double 4-patch, a double 4-patch, matching up to a 4-patch. Then the same piecing element lives in the border. So instead of one big triangle, you've got a double 4-patch, a double 4-patch, a double 4-patch. Then here is my side set triangle. So the math for the little diagonal guy is this double 4-patch on point. But the rest of this is arbitrary. You could start in the center with the big 4-patch, divide it up into that one. I recommend when you're building something like this and you want to adjust your sizes, you start with the smallest element because it's easier to move up than it is back down sometimes. Here's one of those examples of why occasionally, instead of putting one big half square triangle on this corner that equals these two, I can take two of the quarter squares, sew them together, which in essence makes them a half square, but it's so much easier to do, and I'm piecing that element. This could be, you could make a larger half square for the corner that equals these two. I just had a bunch of these and just sewed two of them together and put that in the corner. Now this next little quilt you're looking at is Sweet Tarts, and this particular one is living in someone else's house now. I don't even know who, but somebody else owns it, and it is a pure example of a simple 9-patch set on point in 3 strippy little rows. A sweet little quilt, easy to execute, and building on everything we've talked about from our simple little 9-patches and adding our side sets. Those are the 4 daily breads that are in a bundle for you. We've got another sweet little prize for you. If you would like to own all 4 of those, we have a good little prize for you. And that'll be in, Brian will figure out where to put it. I don't even know where he puts it. I don't even know where it lives. The links are in the description below. One of these days I'm going to get a big old sign back there behind his head that'll tell me all that. And then it's more fun to aggravate him by having him have to find it. So now our next little project is a block that lives in Graceful Journey. And there's a quilt in the book that is called Christian Cross. And as you look at that quilt, it looks real complex, that block. It's a little bit like Baby Album that we did in the first session if you turned it on point. Sometimes the block is also called Washington Sidewalk. It's got quite a few names, but the name Christian Cross because all of the quilts that are in the Graceful Journey book is really based on scripture. So there would be, one of the blocks would have a name and then the scripture would be related to it. But what I love about this block is, as with what we've learned so far, and let's assume you've never done anything, you can make this block. Now here is a pieced, finished block exactly like the size in the pattern. And you're like, oh, I don't believe I could do that without a pattern. Let me show you how easy this one breaks down. It starts its life out as a 9-patch. Now you could decide what size you wanted that 9-patch. This square is the same size as that square. That rectangle is the size of 3 squares. So you could start out with any size square in the world and build this quilt without a pattern. I'm going to turn this on point, so now I need a side set triangle that is calculated based on the diagonal of this square. Now, some of your eyes have already crossed and you're like, what? That square is how I determined this guy. The diagonal of this is this plus, plus, plus. Now, the patterns written in books don't have this much extra play in them. They're assuming you're sewing perfect. So if you're reading a pattern and it tells you to cut that spot on, you might want to up that square a little bit and then cross cut it, and it gives you a little play. So I need a side set there, I need a side set there, and then I need a corner, and then let's open this. Now, so what I've done is I've built 2 like this, and that's these 2 right here. Then this one needs 1 more side set, and 1 more side set, and I did these in different colors on purpose so that you could spot, made the 9 patch, same size as the 9 patch, times 3 of the 9 patches. This is math's based on that. That's how I get this. See, I have trimmed this one exactly to 1/4 of an inch. This particular side I have not trimmed. So do you see how much overage I have over and above 1/4 of an inch? See this side? I've trimmed this side to 1/4 of an inch. And so because I haven't trimmed this one, see how that corner is a perfect 90. When you end up with a block on the diagonal that you have a clean 90 corner, you are home free and you have done your work right. Because what happens so often is it looks a little bit like that. Then when that block gets set and there's 8 or 10 or 12 blocks, it continues to multiply. So you can see how a complex block like that, you could be a very, very beginner and you could have success with this if you followed the methods of what we were talking about. Now, one little tidbit about the actual quilt that you looked at that is the project quilt in the book. I bought those blocks years and years and years ago, and I've been sitting on them and I wanted to do something with them. So the blocks are late 1800s. I merely got as best I could, and they needed a little cleaning up, and there's some points missing on it, but I love the quilt more because those were blocks made a long time ago, and then I just chose the setting fabric and the way that I put it together. It's one of those that I have not yet let go of. I've been selling a lot of my quilts, but that one is pretty special to me because of that. Okay, the last quilt in this series that we're going to be working on is out of a book called Checks and Chicks. Now, this book has been out of print for quite some time. It has never been available as a PDF, so it is the first time that it will be offered as a PDF, as well as the Graceful Journey will be offered as a PDF. And it's called the Hobo Quilt. And we did this, Vicki Tracy, a good friend of mine, and I worked on this book together, and it was based on a fabric collection I did at the time. And gosh, I'm telling you, it's like pour yourself a cup of tea and sit down and read the book. It is loaded with fun stuff. It has recipes. It's where the checkerboard is in that, at least 4 or 5 other quilts or more in there that's built off of nothing but like pre-cut panels and things like that. And it is a book that was written that went with the rulers that I had designed that are no longer available. Silly people decided not to do that. I'm not bitter about that at all. So in the event that you own specialty rulers, that's rulers that calculate and cut half squares and quarter squares and so on and so on, there is a segment that also tells you how to do it traditionally. But you folks already know the math. You know how to calculate your own squares, your own side things, and the whole 9 yards. But let's take a look at the little quilt. This is a pure example of why I love squares set on point. A lot of the confusion for people is how they sew these. And in any of the patterns that you're getting, there is a direction line. And so instead of sewing row 1, row 2, row 3, you sew everything on the diagonal. So you build your rows this way. When I sew a quilt like this, I kind of want to do my math on what are these blocks. So there's 1 square, 3 squares, 5, 5, 5, 3, and 1. So if you wanted a queen size quilt, you could do 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, blah, blah, blah. That's how you grow these quilts if you decide that you like this look. This is very similar to Scrappy Squares, which is the first project sheet we showed you, because Scrappy Squares is built on 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. That's how you're building it, and then you just have to watch. Some places get a corner and a side, and then some places will have this side's going to come in a second. So now I'm going to put the last row of the 3, and it's going to sit right there. And then my next corner has 1 square and 2 side squares, and it sits right there. And now I just need to put that corner on. So typically, if I'm sewing I don't care how many elements it's got. My corners are the very last thing I put on a quilt, a block, or anything, because I like all the other to be done. So when I plop this little corner on here now, and you can see it's a little too big. If you see, I'm oversized on purpose. I want to turn this over, and just so you can see, oh dear, look, I need to fix that. Well, see, I thought I was all perfect. Look at that, folks. Actually, she should be pressed that way, but see how nice and flat that lays? So this is really, even though it's a little block in itself, it's a great way to think about building your quilts. And I will tell you, this makes the best placemat in the world. If you just said, oh, I don't want to make that quilt, but I sure do like that little block, make these, slap a little border on it, and you got a killer placemat. So again, this is a good way to get into those squares that you buy the pre-cuts, and you got stacks of 5-inch and stacks of 10-inch. Well, you can cut those 10s down. I mean, you can make these any size you want to, because you already know how to do your side set. And this little last quilt is called Almost Solid. And actually, the mother quilt, this is a second quilt I've made. You're looking at a picture of the original quilt. And this is a little bit smaller scale. I changed the size of the 9-patch that lives in the middle. I think this might be one of the best quilts in the world to make if you have a color issue. If you have a problem with trying to decide between light, medium, and dark, and how do I build my quilt, and how does it work, and I don't understand. The blocks sort of move. You can see that in some cases you can spot a positive 9-patch. In some cases you can spot a negative 9-patch. You can see that the color was a great way, when I first was teaching this, was learning color, learning how to get a different look, having things that recede and having things that come up. So this is all solids, but in the original quilt, it had one fabric in it that was a patterned piece. So that's why I called it Almost Solid. All it was just simply starts its life out as a 9-patch, then a rectangle, corner squares, blocks, done. Whatever that is what size your plain square is, and that is also how you do your math for your side setting triangle. Now let me tell you, folks, for all the quilts that I have made and as much traveling as I have done, some of my quilts don't come home. And the project quilt that is the cover of the pattern, and it was part of the Signature Scraps pattern series, that little quilt has never found its way back home. So if you look around and you go, oh my goodness, that's that quilt I never did return back to Kaye. If it were to find its way home, I'd be real happy. But we are packaging the Checks and Chicks book and the Graceful Journey book and the Almost Solid pattern in another one of those bundles we can't talk about. You'll be pleased, I think. But in the event that you already own one and like the others, they are all available in different formats. The buy is always when we do the bundle. Okay, now we're going to take a real quick look at these quilts on the wall, but I really wanted to share this quilt with you. It's been in my collection for quite a while, and it was from the dealer that I bought this quilt from. It was referred to as an old carriage cloth. It's quite old. And these are like home deck fabrics. They're thick and like almost upholstery weight. And then this is a black wool that's in it. And this is just the sweetest quilt. It's not quilted or tied. It's just that layer. And look at the back. Back is fabulous. It's like an old medallion. It's kind of a silk. It's just such a pretty little quilt. They apparently did not get a class on how to get those points. So it's a little wonky there. Oh, there's another wonky. This is the antique blocks that I had, and then I put the side set fabrics in and the strippy, creating that one. This is a very old dress, the fabric. Now, I don't really know when it was made, but I know for sure the fabric is 1800s, and the blocks. When it was made, I don't know, but I actually wore this one. It was an experience, I'm telling you. But see, this block is similar to that one that we made, because there's your 9-patch, Then you do your fillers sort of like I did on the Christian cross quilt. I wanted to share this last little quilt with you. It's one of the first quilts I made. It's got to be at least 30 years old, somewhere in that ballpark. And it's nothing but a simple 9 patch, and I think these are 2.5 inch squares, side set, strippy, and folks, it's even hand quilted. This still is one that's in my collection. It's out, sometimes it's on a bed, sometimes it's just laying across the sofa. I still love this style of work. Okay, that's a wrap for us today. And you notice I let my hair down and everything. We do have another little bonus in the free stuff, a little page that'll make you chuckle. It's got a lot to do with my theory about diet and exercise and all that bunch of stuff. So when you read it, have a good laugh and think about me. We'll see you next time. Have a great day. Bye-bye.